There are women remembered for their fairy tale weddings, for sweet children and homes filled with laughter. But there is another kind of woman. No white gown, no lullabies, no bustling dinner tables. And yet she leaves behind a legacy as enduring and silent as a boulder in the sea. Katharine Hepburn was that kind of woman. She never married. She never had children. There was no perfect family portrait framed above the fireplace. Instead, she built a private life, free, deliberate, and never once filled with regret. In a world that once taught women that happiness meant having someone beside them, she walked alone. And every step she took became a trail marker for those who came after, whispering, "There is nothing wrong with living for yourself. You owe no one an apology for being different. And no, it's not empty. Not when you dare to live each day entirely on your own terms." Before the world knew Katharine Hepburn as one of the greatest actresses of all time, she was just a skinny, brown-haired girl growing up in a household where normal was forbidden. Her mother, Katharine. Martha Houghton. Hepburn was no typical woman of her era. She was a feminist warrior, a woman who stood for suffrage, reproductive rights, and gender equality in a society that still treated boldness as shameful. In their home in Hartford, Connecticut, outdated traditions had no place. Dr. Houghton, a physiologist and a founder of Planned Parenthood, raised her children under one sacred principle. Freedom of thought is holy. Little Katharine was not asked to be polite, soft, or pleasing to men. She was encouraged to climb trees, read philosophy, swim in winter, and speak her mind at the dinner table. While other girls were learning flower arranging and embroidery, Katharine trained in golf, rowing, and fencing. While her peers dreamed of marrying lawyers, she dreamed of winning on any playing field she stepped into. She was taught that marriage was not a destination. It was a choice, and one that should only be made if it truly brought joy. If not, that was okay too. One memory stayed with Katharine forever: the morning she discovered her closest brother had taken his own life at the age of 15. That tragedy turned her from a carefree girl into a fiercely determined woman. From that day on, she was never the same. She cut her hair short, wore trousers, at a time when pants on women were rebellious. She spoke less but did more. And most of all, she began to live by one guiding question: if I only live once, will I do it for myself or for other people's expectations? At Bryn Mawr College, a progressive women's college, Katharine began to feel more clearly the boundaries society placed on her gender. Even among intellectuals, women were still reminded to consider motherhood as a sacred mission. But raised by a mother who broke every mold, Katharine found the idea unappealing. To her, motherhood was a choice, not a duty. And if she chose not to become a mother, that didn't make her any less of a woman. Perhaps it was that cradle of freedom in childhood, the forced maturity through grief, and a mother who dared to go against the tide that shaped Katharine Hepburn into someone different. Not a woman looking for security in a marriage, but a woman willing to walk alone and grateful for the path. Hollywood may have been the land of dreams, but to Katharine, the true dream was to be herself, unbound, unyielding, and unapologetic. Hollywood in the early 1930s was more than the film capital of America. It was a factory, producing images of womanhood. Female stars were expected to follow an unwritten code: be beautiful, alluring, yet sweet, strong, but never threatening to men, and above all, belong to someone: a wife, a lover, a mother, anything but independent. Katharine Hepburn walked into Hollywood like a scratch on a polished painting, angular, slim, with a husky voice, and eyes that never begged for approval. She didn't resemble any other actress of the time. Not sweet like Ginger Rogers, not sultry like Mae West, not delicate like Joan Fontaine. And she didn't pretend to be. She refused to wear evening gowns when it wasn't necessary. She came to set in oversized shirts, khakis, and tied back hair, what producers called anti-feminine. She didn't care. When a designer refused to let her wear pants, she hid all her skirts and walked out in her underwear until they returned her favorite trousers. She didn't do it for attention. She did it out of principle. And that principle was simple. I don't dress so people see me as gentle. I dress so I can move through the world like a person. Success came quickly with Morning Glory, her Oscar-winning role. But backlash came just as fast. The press called her unlikable, stubborn, too masculine. Rumors spread that male co-stars disliked working with her because she was too independent. She didn't attend parties. She didn't flatter directors. She didn't smile for power. She came to work. And in Hollywood, a woman who came just to work, not to flirt, not to marry, not to model homemaking, was hard to accept. While others signed long-term contracts to preserve a consistent image, Katharine carefully selected roles, often complex, unsympathetic, but honest. In Alice Adams, she played an insecure poor girl. In Little Women, she was Jo March, headstrong, unmarried. Jo March, by no coincidence, was the mirror Katharine saw each morning. Then the inevitable happened. After a string of box office flops, she was labeled box office poison. A lesser actress might have bowed, accepted a romantic comedy, or married a leading man to save her image. But Katharine didn't bend. She bought the rights to the Philadelphia story, hired a screenwriter, found a director, and made the film that resurrected her career. No rescue, no man's name, no marriage as a stepping stone. She stood up on her own. Katharine Hepburn didn't win against Hollywood by playing by its rules. She won by rewriting the rules line by line with the story of her own life. In Hollywood from the 1930s through the 1950s, women's magazines dedicated full pages to how to keep your husband or being a perfect mom while staying glamorous. Even the most successful actresses often cemented their fame with dream marriages. Grace Kelly became a princess. Joan Crawford adopted 4 children to craft the image of a model mother. In that landscape, choosing to remain single and childless was like stepping outside the script entirely. But Katharine Hepburn was never afraid of standing apart from the crowd. When asked why she never married, she smiled and said, "I got used to my freedom. And I don't want to share it with anyone, not even someone I love." A simple answer, but in that era, it hit like a punch to the gut of convention. She had deep romances with Ludlow Ogden Smith, with Howard Hughes, and most profoundly with Spencer Tracy. But none ended in marriage. Not because she wasn't proposed to, but because she didn't need marriage to feel whole. Katharine once said bluntly, "I don't believe in marriage. It's a social contract designed to keep women in line." That choice made her the subject of gossip for decades. Her sexuality was questioned. She was mocked in columns as a bitter spinster. Some directors claimed she couldn't connect with mother roles because she didn't know how to love properly. But Katharine didn't respond with outrage. She simply kept living with the calm of someone who never needed validation to know her worth. Instead of raising children, she raised roles with depth characters who didn't need rescuing. Instead of hosting birthday parties for a husband or kids, she hosted her own life the way she wanted, reading through the night, rowing at dawn, spending afternoons watering her garden or writing letters to friends. No children's laughter, no crowded dinner tables, but also no sacrifices that left her feeling empty. Once during an interview, the host asked, "Do you regret not having a family?" Katharine looked into the camera and replied, "I have a family. My mother is my best friend. I have my work, the people I've loved, and I have myself. Nothing about that feels like regret." In a time when women were told they only became whole through the roles of wife and mother, Katharine Hepburn chose a different path, not to rebel, but because it was the most honest path her heart could take. Katharine Hepburn once said, "I didn't learn how to be a woman from the world. I learned it from my mother." And indeed, everything that made her different, unconventional, unyielding, unapologetic, had the fingerprints of Katharine Martha Houghton Hepburn, a woman born into an old world, but who lived at least 50 years ahead of her time. Mrs. Houghton was a fierce feminist. As a founding member of the American Birth Control League, she stood on podiums, while still young, speaking about a woman's right to control her body at a time when such topics were taboo. She wrote essays, led public forums, and traveled tirelessly to campaign for change. And she taught her children, especially Katharine, that women didn't need to be sweet to be accepted. They needed strength to choose their own paths. Little Katharine grew up among secret meetings, passionate speeches, and bold conversations about politics, gender, and individual liberty. There was no scene of mother cooking while calling the children to the table. In that home, anyone could be the cook, the speaker, the thinker, regardless of gender. There was no man's work or woman's work. There was only work, and who had the courage to do it? Every Sunday, while other families dressed for church, the Hepburns dressed comfortably and went rowing. No hymns, no rituals, just nature and long conversations about feminism, human rights, art philosophy. To Katharine, that wasn't unusual. It was the only normal she ever knew. When asked later why she wasn't afraid to live alone, Katharine never hesitated. "I saw my mother stand on a wooden crate in front of a hall full of shouting men, and she didn't blink. I learned from her that loneliness isn't as scary as silence when it's time to speak." Throughout her life, Katharine kept the habit of writing to her mother, whether filming in Hollywood, touring in Europe, or during quiet days by Long Island Sound. She told her everything. New roles, new lovers, confusion when misunderstood by the public, and sleepless nights when the world felt too loud. Every letter ended with one phrase: "Your daughter still not sorry." The relationship wasn't always smooth. Her mother was often too busy to ask. "Are you okay?" Katharine was often too proud to admit she wasn't. But between them was a cord that couldn't be cut, the belief that every woman deserves to live her life without asking permission. In a world where mothers taught daughters to be gentle to be loved, Katharine's mother taught her that freedom was the greatest gift one woman could give another. And Katharine lived each day as a woman, carrying that gift, proud, brave, and never once feeling incomplete. As Katharine Hepburn walked alone, unburdened by titles, like wife or mother, many actresses of her time chose the opposite path, the one society applauded: marriage, motherhood, becoming the ideal image of American womanhood. Grace Kelly, with her refined beauty and soft voice, left Hollywood to become Princess of Monaco. Her marriage to Prince Rainier was considered a real-life fairy tale. The golden girl of the screen became the perfect wife, the perfect mother. But behind the elegant facade was a woman often forbidden from returning to her career, who quietly mourned giving up the stage too soon. Joan Crawford, sharp-featured and ambitious, married multiple times and adopted children to fill the void of her personal life. Yet it was her daughter Christina who later wrote a memoir describing a childhood of control and emotional absence. Sometimes the cost of playing the right role wasn't just paid by the woman, it was passed to the innocent. Bette Davis, just as bold as Katharine, tried marriage motherhood but lived through broken unions and custody battles. In one interview, she admitted, "I love my child, but I don't know if I was ever a good mother," a painful truth, and one society rarely allowed women to speak out loud. And then, amid grand weddings and picture-perfect family portraits, there was Katharine moving through life like a mountain climber. No one waiting at the base, no fear of heights, no wedding photos, no birth certificates. But she had roles that echoed her soul. She woke each morning with no need to ask anyone for permission. And she spent nights reading, brewing her own tea, watching moonlight spill across her window, never feeling empty, never needing to share it to feel seen. Katharine's choice wasn't a rejection of marriage or motherhood. It was a declaration that happiness has more than one definition, that norms aren't cages, they're choices. Looking back, no one could say Katharine Hepburn lived less fully than anyone else. She simply wrote her story with a different pen, one that didn't copy any previous draft. If anything proved that Katharine Hepburn could love as deeply as any woman ever has, it was her nearly 3-decade-long relationship with Spencer Tracy, a love with no vows, no wedding rings, no shared home, yet as complete as any quiet family. They met in 1941 on the set of Woman of the Year. Katharine, then a towering figure in Hollywood, was warned. He's devoutly religious, married, and has 2 children. Don't get involved. But nothing stops 2 people when they find something unnamed, but real, a soft resonance like 2 lamps placed close enough to guide without blinding. Spencer was a private man, carrying heavy sorrows. His son was born deaf, an ache he never got over. His wife was kind, but a gap had long grown between them. Katharine didn't step in to destroy. She stepped in to soothe like a quiet cloth laid gently over a cracked heart. For nearly 27 years, they didn't live in the same house. There was no engagement, no public promises. She never formally met his family. He remained legally married out of faith and guilt. But when he fell ill, she cared for him. When he filmed, she waited. When he couldn't sleep, she made tea and read aloud. No one called it an official role. But in silence, she was the only person he needed. Spencer once said, "I don't know if I deserve her, but no one else could have put up with me this long." Katharine never asked anything of him. She accepted her place beside, but never ahead. No title, but always present. When Spencer died in 1967, she didn't attend the funeral. Not out of disrespect, but to avoid hurting his lawful wife. A lifetime of loving someone without the world ever naming it. Yet Katharine never complained. She simply said, "I had him in my way." And that was enough. To many, it looked like a love unfulfilled. But to her, it was proof that love doesn't need a wedding to be sacred. No papers to be lasting. No audience to be eternal in the heart of a woman who gave her all. There's something people rarely say aloud, but many quietly believe that a woman without a husband or children will grow old, lonely. That when the stage lights dim and no one calls her name, she will sit in a silent house, aching for a tiny voice to call her mom or a Thanksgiving table full of laughter. But Katharine Hepburn, just as she had done all her life, rewrote even the definition of solitude. When she turned 70, then 80, then 90 people still saw her walking the coastline of old Saybrook, Connecticut, wide-brimmed hat, long wool coat, eyes sharp as ever like time hadn't dared dull her gaze. No one by her side, no hand to steady her on the steps, but no need for one either. She still brewed her own tea, read late into the night, and now and then wrote letters to old friends. No children checking in, perhaps. But she had herself to talk to, and that was never a burden. Someone once asked, "Do you ever regret not having children?" She answered without hesitation, "I would have been a wonderful mother. I love children. But I never felt I needed to be one to be complete. I've lived a full life, and I know that." In her final years, her health faded. Her voice grew raspier. Her hands shook slightly when signing books, but her mind remained sharp. Looking back, she didn't talk about Oscars or red carpets. She remembered rowing with her mother, reading until sunrise, quiet dinners alone by a window, not tragic, not theatrical, just the sea breeze and soft moonlight. She once wrote, "I never felt lacking just because I didn't have what others called a home. I lived in a house of my own, making built on trust, courage, and a little youthful defiance." Her old age didn't include small hands tugging at her skirt or family photo ops, but she had the peace of someone who lived exactly how she wanted. And to her, that was the final and greatest gift. Katharine Hepburn never called herself an activist. She didn't lead rallies like her mother. She didn't give public speeches or hold protest signs. But her very existence, choosing to live alone, to love without chains, to work for passion instead of approval, was louder than any declaration. When the feminist movement surged through the 1960s and 70s, young women searched for role models. They read Simone de Beauvoir and Betty Friedan. But in a quieter corner, many found Katharine a woman who never shouted slogans, but had lived as if they were self-evident truths. More than once, young actresses sought her out. Jane Fonda once admitted, "I grew up in a world that told women to be pretty sweet and obedient. But when I saw Hepburn walk onto a set in trousers, I knew I didn't need anyone's permission to be myself." Meryl Streep considered her spiritual successor, once said, "Katharine didn't just act, she invented a new kind of woman, one who didn't need saving, didn't need to marry, and never apologized for being smart." But Katharine always modest, never claimed to be a pioneer. "I wasn't trying to inspire anyone," she said. "I just lived a life I wasn't ashamed of. If that helps someone, then I'm grateful." She didn't preach. She didn't go on TV and tell women to be independent. But she lived every day as proof that you don't need to be defined by anyone. You don't need marital status to be respected. You don't need children to be complete. Generations of women, and then the ones after them, slowly learned to ask, "Am I living this life for myself or for someone else's old expectations?" And many of them, when putting on trousers for the first time, or declining a proposal they didn't want, or booking a solo trip at age 50, did so because one woman once walked ahead following no one. On June 29, 2003, the headlines read, "Katharine Hepburn dies at home at 96. There was no grand funeral, no crowds jostling for place, just a newsline, a black and white photo, and a silence that spread like early morning mist. She passed in her coastal home in Old Saybrook, the place where she had spent most of her post-Hollywood life. No bedside vigil, no dramatic farewells, but nothing lonely either. She had prepared for that moment, her entire life. In a small oak drawer by her bed were handwritten letters, many to her mother, to Spencer Tracy, and some to herself. Words scratched in fading ink, telling the story of a life that asked no permission, but was always thankful. Her will didn't list heirs. There were no children. Instead, she left her philosophy books to the public library, a few cherished trinkets to her loyal housekeeper, and her home not to be sold, but kept open for young artists needing space to dream. Not everyone understood that choice. Some pitied it, others admired it. But no one could deny Katharine Hepburn had lived fiercely and left with empty hands, but a full soul. A writer once said, "If you want to know how a woman lived, look at how she died." And Katharine, who never wore a wedding gown, never heard mom, never bowed for love, left with a soft smile and an open notebook beside her bed. "I had a wonderful life. I don't need anything more. No tears, no trumpets. Just a breezy afternoon, a few gulls gliding past the window, and the quiet echo of a life that never fit the mold, but forever fits the hearts of those who crave freedom." After Katharine Hepburn passed away, There were no streets named in her honor, no private museums, no grand statues in public parks. But in countless kitchens, where women cooked dinner for one in quiet apartments of young women who dared to decline weddings they didn't want in the mornings, when a middle-aged woman folded her blanket and stepped out of a loveless marriage. There Katharine still lived. She never told anyone how to live. But the way she lived became a whisper, gentle but unforgettable. You are not incomplete just because you're not married. You don't need to have children to be meaningful, and you can live a full, beautiful life with only yourself. Katharine's path was not smooth. She was misunderstood, criticized, called odd. But she never apologized. She didn't bend to norms. She didn't seek comfort in the traditional role. Instead, she built a life on her own terms, with her hands, her heart, and a deep belief that every woman has the right to choose. Perhaps the greatest gift she left behind wasn't her 4 Oscars. It wasn't the iconic roles. It was the quiet courage of her life, the way she walked tall, unshaken by expectations, unafraid of judgment, unburdened by regret. And if someday you find yourself at a crossroads, wondering whether to let go of something sacred just to hold on to yourself, remember her. You don't need permission. You don't need to explain. You just need courage, as Katharine once did.